Welcome everyone to the CamAPS FX webinar. This is the fifth in our series, and we are going to be covering very practical sessions about how to adjust settings depending on the stats that Diasend is showing you. Please feel free to ask questions via the chat, and please keep your videos off and yourself on mute for the duration. So use the chat function to ask questions, and we'd be delighted to take them at the end. Next slide, please. We have exciting webinars coming next year. We have decided to focus on sort of different age groups or different situations and use really practical case studies to work through, the situations you may be facing and what possible solutions there would be. So the first one we are starting in January is on pregnancy. Then we move through to children and then adults and young adults, and then other sort of life situations and circumstances. So please do book in for them and join us. As per usual, the team that is delivering the session is Charlotte and Sarah. We just give a nod to Roman because he's infinitely part of the team and sort of the backbone to the CamAPS FX system. And I'm here just to facilitate the questions and keep us all to time. So I'm going to hand over now to Charlotte to start the presentation. Thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks, Candice. So tonight's webinar is looking at sort of fine-tuning the closed loop system with the goal to sort of improve time in range, which is sort of a key metric that people are talking about in terms of glucose controls. We're very much moving away from HbA1c as a measure. And with increasing use of glucose sensors, we've now got the ability to measure this thing called time in range. So over the next sort of 20-30 minutes, we'll be looking at developing a sort of structured approach to reviewing the data, looking at an overview of the statistics, which you can see in Diasend, and hopefully we'll get you a bit more familiar with all the different options in Diasend, how to review the continuous glucose monitor or glucose sensor AGP, which is the ambulatory glucose profile. And again, hopefully by the end of the session, we're a bit familiar with some of this terminology. And then thinking about some of the common scenarios that we see, particularly high glucose variability and some of the things to consider, the insulin to carbohydrate ratio, thinking about bolus timing and insulin variability. And then we'll also look at cases of high time in hypoglycaemia and high time in hyperglycaemia. So when we talk about time in range targets, these come from a very recent international consensus from leaders in diabetes who discussed and looked at the evidence for what the targets should be. And you can see here on the bar on the left, these are the targets for people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So the targets aren't meant to be achievable by everybody. That's why they're a target, but this is what we can be aiming for. And what we're looking at is a time of more than 70% in the target range of 3.9 to 10. But this needs to be achieved with time in hypoglycaemia, so less than 3.9, of less than 4%, and time in what we call clinically important hypoglycemia, so less than 3.0, we want to be less than 1%. For those people who are pregnant with type 1 diabetes, the target range is slightly different, so 3.5 to 7.8. So we aim for people to run a much tighter glycemic control during pregnancy with similar times within that target range, so 70% between 3.5 to 7.8. And for those who might be at greater risk of adverse consequences of hypoglycemia, so potentially those who are older or more frail or with other medical issues, we would be thinking of less time in the target range with more time slightly above to try and minimize the time in hypoglycemia. So this is for the more at-risk population. So just by way of a reminder, and I hope many of you have come to our previous webinar, so we won't spend too long on this, but just so that you're aware, the CamAPS FX closed system works by the way it modulates insulin delivery is it sets the insulin pump basal rates down to 0 and then calculates a new extended bolus rate, which is adjusted every 8 to 12 minutes in response to the sensor glucose, so the real-time glucose data. And as we've mentioned before, this means that you get this no delivery message on the pump screen, but don't worry about that. It tells you the extended bolus just on top of it, which you can see in the photo there. And if there is a real reason for no delivery of insulin, you will get an alarm, whether that's a sound alarm or a vibrate, depending on your personal choice on the pump. And again, we've mentioned this before, but it's really important when we're thinking about how we can improve time in range, what can be adjusted. So the settings which can be adjusted in this system to optimize outcomes are the insulin to carbohydrate ratio and the personal glucose target. And the default for this is set at 5.8 millimoles per litre. And for the vast majority of people, that's perfectly adequate and there's no reason to change it. And we'll come through some of the circumstances where you might think about adjusting that. Unlike other closed loop systems that are out there, the active insulin time and the insulin sensitivity will not affect closed loop operation. These are automatically calculated by the algorithm in real time and constantly adjusted, so it's adaptable to the individual. And the pre-programmed basal rates aren't taken into consideration by the algorithm either. It is important that these are set correctly. If auto mode is not available, so during a sensor change for a short period of time, then it's important that these are accurate. But just to be aware that changing the active insulin time is not going to affect closed loop insulin delivery. So I mentioned previously about the targets, and we've gone into sort of the numbers that we're kind of aiming for. What's really important is that you make sure when you're looking at this that you've got at least 2 weeks of data. Otherwise, we can easily fall foul of seeing sort of just 2 days worth and making lots of decisions based on a small amount of data. So it's generally felt that by 2 weeks, we've got a good sort of feel and a good reflection of what's happening day to day. So when we look on Diasend, we can see this ambulatory glucose profile. And you can see here on the graph in the screen, the orange line is showing you the mean glucose over the period of 24 hours. And this is over the period that you select. So I would often select this over a 2 to 4 weeks, probably, to see the most recent trends. So you can see, and this is by no means your average person, and we don't anticipate that everybody's going to be like this, but this is just an example. So this individual has incredible mean glucose over the course of the day. The blue shaded areas show you the variability of the mean glucose. So you can see in the darker blue shaded areas is the 25 and 75% range, and then in the lighter shaded areas it's the 95 and 5%. So 90% of the time is spent within the blue shaded areas. Try not to worry too much about these ones at the top and bottom. That's the extremes. So that is over the period of the month, what was the highest glucose at this period of the day. I think it can be quite easy to be drawn to them, particularly if there's been a set failure or something and it's up here, instantly your eye goes to that. It's important just to focus on this. And I think one of the key things that I always notice is when people have adjusted the target, we have good guidelines to say actually 3.9 to 10 is the target range. And often people who are really trying to sort of have very tight glucose control will adjust that. And actually it can really affect psychologically if you're seeing less time in the target that you've sort of set for yourself. So it is important to think about some of these things, I think. So you can see here you get a summary at the bottom as well, and you can see for this individual, I mean, this is really incredible. They're spending 91% of their time in the target glucose range, and this isn't coming with a high burden of hypoglycaemia. So their time in hypo is 2% with 0% in clinically important hypoglycemia, so that less than 3.0 millimoles per litre. So their mean glucose is 6.8 millimoles per litre, and you can see the sort of extremes here. I tend not to focus too much on that. And then we look at the measures of variability, and we can see here, even by eye, the blue shaded area is very narrow. And you can see the standard deviation is low, 2 millimoles per litre. And then we use this measure of variability called coefficient of variation. And what it does is it tells you how variable the glucose is. And it's been sort of reported in studies that a coefficient of variation less than 36% sort of reflects a stable glucose profile. So where it's greater than that, the risk of significant hypo and hyperglycaemia is much more likely. So we're sort of targeting this to be less than 36%. And you can see here, in this case, it's 29%. The glucose management indicator, or GMI, which often used to be called the estimated HbA1c, just gives a calculation of the HbA1c based on the mean glucose. So another way that you can look at the data in Diasend, so this is sort of the landing page when you go into Diasend, and you can see the bar chart here, which looks more similar to what we saw earlier with the targets. So again, this is the same individual, so 91% time in range. And sometimes it can be really helpful. This series of bars across the bottom here, you can see that they're different periods of day, and it can identify particular times of day where there may be more problems with hypos or more time in hyperglycemia. So it can help you really sort of target where you're looking to try and improve things. I don't think there's a huge amount of improvement that can be done here, but we'll go through some cases which are probably more reflective of day-to-day realities with type 1 diabetes. Once we've looked at the overview, I think what's really important is this part of Diasend, which is the day-to-day comparison tab. And what it allows you to see is the sensor glucose each individual day, and it's overlaying the closed loop insulin delivery. And here you can see how accurate the carbohydrate ratios might be, or if there's any problems with those. You can get a good idea of the timing of boluses and some of the other features, so ease off and boost, which you can see in the yellow and red shaded areas. So I'm going to hand you over to Sarah now to talk probably about more realistic situations.
Yeah, so absolutely. This is an AGP that you're probably more likely to see. This is probably more normal and the sort of thing we'd look at and think, okay, there's probably some things we can do to improve this, and where do you start? And taking this as your starting point can be really helpful, because it will help you work out where you want to then look when you look at the day-by-day graphs to drill down and see kind of where the issues might be and what you might be needing to change in terms of potentially carb ratios or bolus timing, for example. So when you look at this, what you can see conversely to the one that Charlotte was just showing you earlier on is how much wider these bands are. So the variability is much greater, and you've got quite a lot of sort of lower level and quite a lot of higher level, but just in terms of those dotted lines, just try kind of not to have your eye drawn to the dotted lines. Be looking kind of for the light blue and dark blue sections as kind of where you're going to go. And you know, time in range, when you look at that in the middle there, 60%, it's not terrible, but we know we can do better with the system. So the thing that we're looking is particularly the fact that there's quite a lot of low glucose. There's 7% below 4 and 3% in the kind of worryingly low level below 3. So that's one of the first things that you want to look at. And when you look at that, you're then looking at the graph and looking to see, okay, where is that tending to come in? So looking at where the darker blue and the lighter blue are on the bottom there, so you can see kind of that period of sort of just in the afternoon there might be somewhere where you might want to identify if there's particular issues you can deal with there and what might be causing those. Could be something to do with the fact that there's looks to be a bigger spike post lunch that then may be impacting later on in the afternoon. And again, overnight potentially there's a little bit more. If you look sort of from midnight through to 4 a.m, you can see there's an increased sort of area there where there's glucose levels below the target range. So those are the sort of things initially you want to pick out. And also you can see around kind of mid-morning, that's on this particular person's graph, that's where there's much less variability. The lines are quite tight kind of from that 8 to sort of just before lunch point of view. So you're looking and thinking, okay, things are going well at this time of day, what's going wrong after that? And potentially what you're looking at is then, is there an issue around the meal boluses, particularly for lunch, and again even more so potentially for evening meal, where you're seeing these big spikes and much more variability after those times. And then obviously the glucose levels pre-bed can then be impacting with what's going on overnight. And in terms of the standard deviation, you can see this is much wider than what we were looking at before. So 4.5 millimoles with the coefficient of variation that we said we would like ideally below 36% is on 52%. So going forward from looking at this, the things I would then be looking for in the day-by-day graphs is, okay, what potentially is causing those, particularly around the hypos overnight and particularly around carb ratios potentially and meal times. So you're never just going to look at one day by day and think, okay, definitely if I can see this today, I'm going to definitely need to make changes. You're going to want to flick through a number of days in that period that you were looking at and just ensure that, yeah, that is the pattern. It does seem to be what's going on here. And if you look at this, you can see this, the person on this day has had 3 meals. They've had a sort of breakfast, kind of mid-morning, kind of early lunch, if you like, or just or an extra breakfast, brunch type meal, and then something sort of early, sort of late, early evening, late afternoon. And breakfast time, that bolus of 5.4 units looks quite good. It's kept the glucose fairly steady. It's drifted up potentially. The system's had to work a little bit harder between 8 and 10 just to try and keep on top of that. And then another bolus has gone in kind of just after between 10 and 11. And what you can see when that bolus of 3.5 units has gone in there is the glucose has really spiked. So straight away you're thinking, I wonder what's happening there. Is the carb ratio incorrect? Does it need to be more aggressive? Is there miscounting of carbohydrate potentially? It looks like the bolus has gone in, because you can see the rise comes after the bolus has gone in. So it looks like the timing of the bolus isn't a particular issue there. But from that, I'm thinking maybe that carb ratio at that time of day might need adjusting. And the same then with that next bolus later on in the day. You can see in this situation, the bolus appears to have gone in before this big spike, but after it's gone in, you've got this big spike that again is making you start to think, is there an issue with the carb ratio? Is it the choice of carbs? Is it the carb counting? And having a think and a discussion with the person, or just thinking for yourself, am I getting my carb counting right? Is there anything I can do to change the quality of the carbs if that's an issue? And potentially when you look at this, the carb ratio, if the carb counting is accurate, then the carb ratio is the thing that you would want to adjust and bring down by about 10% initially to see if it made a difference for those times of day. So when you're looking at the insulin carb ratio, what you want to do is look at days where you know you've been as accurate with your carb counting as possible. So if you've just had a day, I don't know, you've been away for the weekend, it's been much harder to count, or you know, a child's been to a party or something where you've not had such great control, then obviously stuff happens. You're not going to worry too much about that. What we're looking for is the patterns, the things that we think, yeah, this is happening on a regular basis. We can probably do something about this. So you'd want to review those glucose profiles at breakfast, lunch and dinner separately and check that they're different, you know, that if there's issues around particular times of the day. And you want to look and see if there's anything going on around persistent post-meal hypos, where you've got a situation that potentially if the carb ratio is too strong or aggressive, the glucose drops quite quickly. Or actually conversely, you can get a situation where if the carb ratio isn't aggressive enough and the glucose spikes quite high, then closed loop has to really ramp up after that bolus to deliver lots of extra insulin to keep on top of that, and then you can get a drop that happens later on. So so you're looking for both of those things and trying to work out what needs to happen to that carb ratio, what needs to be changed. And just a reminder that you change your carb ratios on the insulin pump itself, and the app, the phone, will read those from the pump. And we'll always bang on about how important the basics are. So carb counting, even with a closed loop system, is absolutely crucial. So the amount and type of carbohydrate is still important. We still, some people will always get away somehow with and absorb carbohydrate differently and can get away with kind of eating a higher GI foods than others. But generally we would be encouraging a low GI diet and just really considering the accuracy of the carb counting. We know that the auto mode will be able to deal with some post-meal hyperglycaemia if your carb counting is a little bit askew, but it won't deal with really big inaccuracies. And just a reminder that if something has gone a bit wrong and you've just on the odd occasion been spiking post-meal, you can utilize the boost function just to help bring the glucose level back into target a little bit faster, remembering that boost will only boost the insulin delivered if the glucose, while the glucose is above target, and if it drops back down to the target range, but you've still got boost on, it will only it will back off. It won't continue to give additional insulin. And it's just also worth thinking when you're looking at meals about whether there's any kind of more high fat, high protein meals that might be causing trouble on certain days, and whether you need, you don't necessarily need to change carb ratios, but you need to consider a different strategy to deal with those meals. So it might be if previously on normal insulin pump therapy, you had done a split bolus or dual wave bolus with a certain percentage up front and then the rest delivered equally over a period of time after, it might be that actually you look to employ a method whereby you only put in a similar percentage as the starting point at the beginning of a high fat, high protein meal, and either let the system deal with the residual carbohydrate as it comes through more slowly, or utilize boost as well to kind of get on top of it better if that's what you need to after the bolus. So just remembering that as well. And again, in terms of the basics, bolus timing being right is really important. It's probably one of the biggest causes of hypoglycaemia is where boluses are delivered late, because you get this issue where the glucose starts to rise as the glucose is being absorbed and the carbohydrates being absorbed, and the system ramps up to deliver lots of extra insulin to try and deal with the rise in glucose, and then the person thinks, oh gosh, I didn't give my bolus, and they put the bolus in. It's almost like the system's given the bolus and you've then given the bolus on top, and it often will end up in hypoglycemia. And what can happen is then people see the drop and they're panicking, and they might in that situation think, oh quick, I'll put ease off on. But actually what you would see is the minute that meal bolus has gone in, the system's not delivering any more insulin, so putting ease off on is not going to stop the dip. It can't suck the insulin back out, so the only option there is to have some additional carbs to help make sure you don't hit that low level. And so we very much encourage bolusing 10 to 15 minutes before eating, but obviously life gets in the way sometimes. And if you do forget to bolus, rather than sort of panicking and shoving the bolus in late, it's definitely worth turning the phone onto its side, reviewing how much work the system has been doing to try and help you, and then maybe just giving a manual correction of maybe half the bolus that you might have had, or putting boost on and letting the system deal with it rather than putting the full amount in and risking a hypo later. And so this slide really nicely shows someone who's probably struggling to get their mealtime bolusing in advance. And so you can see there's a bolus has gone in for a 9.3 unit bolus has gone in kind of around midday, and that seems potentially like it might have been too aggressive. So you can see after that bolus has gone in, the system has backed off to nothing. It's just worth mentioning, you'll always see these little, even when it's really delivering nothing, you'll see these little spikes in insulin delivery. And sometimes people will say, why is it delivering insulin when I'm really dropping? The reason for that is that the system has to give a certain amount every hour. It kind of has to at least pulse every hour, and that will equate to a 0.04 unit bolus, so a really tiny amount to keep the line patent. So that's why some people will get in touch and they'll say, I don't understand why it's delivering extra insulin when I'm actually dropping, but that's all it is. It's the minutest of pulses, just so the line stays patent and it doesn't become occluded. And so it might potentially be that the person has then bolused for this meal that's come in just before 4 o'clock late, because maybe at the time that they did eat, they were on the low side and they thought, I might just leave it a little while until my glucose is a bit higher. Or it might be because they're bolusing because they realise they perhaps overdid the hypo treatment and then are thinking that they ought to put something in to cover the extra carbs they had for the hypo treatment. But nonetheless, the bolus has gone in really when the person's kind of shot back up to 15. And then the problem with that is the system has then started to deliver for the rise already before that 11 unit bolus has gone in. And then you can see the drop then is quite steep as well. In this situation though, the system after 4 o'clock really didn't give any more once that bolus of 11 units went in and really backed off. So it did stop the person dropping back down into hypo range. But then you can see a similar thing's happened then. There's clearly been some carbs gone in of some sort around 7 o'clock, which has caused a really steep rise. The system's ramped up to help get on top of the rise, and then the bolus of 13.2 units has gone in there, causing a really steep drop, and even though the system's pretty much backed off to deliver absolutely nothing following that 13.2 units, it still wasn't backing off to nothing, didn't stop the dip from all the extra insulin that was around. So having those boluses in advance can help avoid that situation. And this is just an example of latent or potentially missed boluses here. So you can see around the sort of 1 o'clock in the daytime, the glucose has been beautifully flat and then clearly started to rise from sort of just before 1, whereas the bolus hasn't gone in, 8.5 units hasn't gone in until there's been that peak of it hitting 10. Despite that, the system ramped up a bit, but then has backed off completely and actually just about managed to avoid dropping into the low level, and then fine for the rest of the day. And then you can see coming to 6 o'clock point, it looks like there's been additional carbs gone in for that really steep rise in glucose there. And the system has then again ramped up quite a lot to try and deal with that rise. And the person has realized and popped boost on, and then probably panicked a bit and thought boost isn't really working, and has put in or potentially maybe they were eating again, so they put in another bolus there, 6.6 units there, and then the glucose has dropped back down into target. So you can see the effect of the system kind of dealing with it, but with a lot of extra work. That really, you know, one of the beauties of closed loop is it should take some of this burden out in terms of having to put boost on and things because things have gone wrong. So that's another example of kind of the sorts of patterns that you can see when you're having a look and thinking kind of, okay, what's gone on? There's been a really steep rise, but no bolus has gone in, and the system's having to work terribly hard to try and keep on top of it.
Okay, and so just moving on slightly, we've talked a little bit about high glucose variability, and one of the things that we wanted to introduce tonight was the idea of insulin variability. So we know that day to day can be very different in terms of individuals' insulin variability, and there's lots of reasons that can contribute to that, and that's really one of the huge benefits of a closed loop system where it decides how much insulin to give based on real-time sensor glucose, not on what happened yesterday. So thinking about how this sort of how to review insulin variability and what sort of the differences might mean. And some of it's fairly straightforward. If somebody runs a marathon one day and doesn't run a marathon the next day, then they're probably going to need a lot less insulin. If somebody has sort of 3 huge meals one day, then they're probably going to need more insulin to cover those carbs. Some of the things that can contribute towards high insulin variability is where somebody's missed quite a few boluses, which may have resulted in hyperglycaemia, and the system not quite managed to catch up with that. One of the things that we most commonly see with this is delayed set changes. So where people really push their sets to sort of 4 or 5 days, you can tend to see a quite typical pattern that there's increased insulin requirements on days 4 and 5, just because it's not reliably getting in because the set change hasn't been done. So the insulin's not potentially as active as it was previously, or there's an issue with it there. And similarly, you're far more prone to infusion site issues sort of day 4 or 5. So we really do encourage people to change the sets every 2 to 3 days. So one of the tabs that you can see in Diasend is this insulin, and I tend to use the trend, and particularly it's helpful to have it probably over a month. So here on this table, you can see the total daily insulin dose over the period of a month. And you can see, as I mentioned, there's quite high variability. So in this individual, they can be anything from 30 units a day to 50 units a day. And this is really typical. And what you can see is that actually the basal has a little bit less variability, but the bolus slightly more. And that's probably more typical of what's needed. So often it's just variation in the amount of carbohydrate. So it's the bolus amount that's more variable. When we compare it to this, which is the same thing over a period of a month, you can see that the variability in total insulin requirements is anything from sort of 55 units a day down to 20 units a day. And unlike in the previous graph, you can see that the majority of the variability is coming from the basal rather than the bolus. So actually the bolus variability is very small. And this suggests to me that closed loop is really sort of working very hard to accommodate what's happening day to day. And it may be a suggestion that perhaps somebody's not doing too many boluses and closed loop sort of having to mop up additional boluses. But really it can help you sort of, when you're looking down, as Sarah says, into the day by day things, actually thinking, well, what happened on this day where the insulin requirements are high? When was the last set change before then? Perhaps there's a good reason for it. And what happened on this day where insulin requirements are much lower? So it's just worth sort of targeting your sort of where you're looking. And again, it's sort of this pattern of high insulin variability and thinking why that might be the case. And again, as I mentioned previously, and we keep going on about sort of the importance of getting the basics right. So the algorithm assumes that insulin is being sort of delivered in a steady rate. So it's really important to get the timing of the set change. And the algorithm, of course, learns. So if it sees that over the past couple of days, higher insulin requirements, it might continue to sort of preemptively give slightly more insulin. And actually, if that's the day that a set change has occurred, then people might run into issues. And so you can actually set a set change alarm within the app, and that can be really helpful as a prompt. And I think some of the other pumps as well do that, which can be really useful. So I'm going to hand you back to Sarah now to look at another case.
So when you're looking at data initially, the Diasend takes you straight to the summary page. And so just kind of looking at this summary page, your eye is drawn to the fact straight away. This is looking pretty good, 78% time in range, and a good average of 6.9 with quite a low standard deviation level. But what the kind of area for concern is the fact that there's a fairly sizable level of low. So you've got 6% low and 3% below the 3.0 millimole per litre level. So that's kind of where you'd be wanting to kind of focus your attentions as you drill down, looking at the ambulatory glucose profile and then onto the day by days. So although overall this looks, you know, decent control, and you've got, you know, your light blue and dark blue levels, you know, the majority of the time between within your target range. The areas that we're looking at for those lows and very lows are where you can see the light blue and dark blue just dropping below your low level there. And what's really interesting with this particular one is the burden of hypos is very much coming in the daytime. And so, you know, over the nighttime, you can see actually the control's quite good. It's very much the issues are in the daytime here, right through to midnight. So, but with sort of particular emphasis, I'd say around this sort of late afternoon time. So looking at that, although overall everything's going well nicely, there's not too much variability. The coefficient of variation 36%, so that sort of upper limit of what we're looking at. What we want to do is keep the time in range and the variation tight, but see if we can just get rid of these the burden of these hypos, particularly through the afternoon. So what you might want to consider with something like that is, what would be the reason for those dips later on? Is the carb ratios too aggressive? So someone's bolusing maybe for their breakfast, lunch and dinner, and it's just making them drop too much after. Is it an issue like we just looked with the bolus timing, where perhaps the bolus timing is off, the carbohydrates being eaten, the glucose rises, the system delivers extra insulin, and then the bolus goes in later, making people drop afterwards? Could it be actually that the carb ratio is not aggressive enough, and there's a bit more of a rise with the meal, which is meaning that either the system's then ramping up to deliver lots of extra insulin, which then causes that mismatch between the glucose absorption and the insulin action, and ends up with a drop later on? Or potentially is it that someone's spiking a little bit high after a meal, and instead of leaving the system to do its job, or thinking actually I might need to change the carb ratio here, or the timing of my bolus, is actually thinking, right, I need to get on top of this and I'm going to pop in an extra correction to just bring it down, and that then causes the glucose level to drop below target post meal. Could it be that there's unanticipated exercise or activity, or potentially just knowing that you're going to do some sort of exercise or activity, say at school with a PE lesson, for example, but forgetting to put ease off on, or not remembering to put it on kind of ideally sort of an hour and a half before that activity starts. So just a reminder that ease off can be really useful in those situations, and also the fact that with both ease off and boost you can preset them. So if you know you've got a gym class or something that you're doing a particular time of day, in the morning at breakfast when you might be thinking about these things potentially and kind of how your day is going to go, you could preset ease off to come on an hour and a half before you know you're going to be doing that activity, and to help stop some potential dips caused by it. And then the other thing that potentially could be an issue is what's the personal glucose target set at? Is this someone trying to run really tight and perhaps having a really low personal glucose target on, and actually should we perhaps as a mitigation think what we need to do is get rid of the hypos? We need to just, even for a short period of time, really up the personal glucose target, and just run slightly higher for a few days, get rid of the hypos, kind of see the wood for the trees in terms of when someone stops then having the hypos, really what is happening in terms of the carb ratios, and whether they're accurate or need adjusting. And then gradually after a couple of days, when you've worked out what needs to happen and adjusted carb ratios, drop those glucose targets down again to something kind of probably as a halfway house. That's meaning that the time in range is still good, but you're not having so many low excursions. And so this is just an example here of a hypo caused by a manual correction. And we were actually looking at this chart earlier on when we were talking, but you can see a meal bolus has gone in. Looks like a well-timed one. It's definitely gone in the evening here at 4 o'clock before, or kind of 3:30 before the glucose has started to rise. But then there's been a big spike in glucose, and so what's happened? You can see the person has put in an additional correction there, even though the system behind that correction has already ramped up to deliver a lot of extra insulin. A correction has gone in on top as well. And then that's just caused the glucose to plummet and shoot over and past. And what you can also see there is after that bolus went in, the system started to deliver less and then delivered absolutely nothing apart from those little pulses that you can see that it would always have to do. But that wasn't enough, or kind of potentially just enough to help scrape through. We don't know, potentially they might have got in with an alarm and had kind of a bit of hypo treatment at the lowest point there potentially, but you can see the system didn't deliver anything for a long time after that bolus went in because there was too much active insulin around. And so just a reminder of the personal glucose target. So you find the personal glucose target in the drop-down menu in the settings part of the menu, and you can have different targets for different times of day. So if you don't set a personal glucose target, the system defaults to 5.8, but by going into the personal glucose target in the menu, switching the toggle to the right so it's on, you can then set them to whatever you want to have them on. And like I say, you could potentially have them slightly tighter during the night when there tends to be less glucose variability, and maybe slightly higher during the day when as well, especially if there's been issues with hypos at a particular time of day or night, you would adjust them based on that. And so, yeah, you would use, as it says there, the lower target if the glucose variability is low, and raise the target for a period of time if there is frequent hypoglycemia. And when you've got a personal glucose target on, it shows on the home screen there, you can see the circle around the little sort of target sign appears on the home screen telling you you've got a personal glucose target active.
So moving on to the last sort of scenario. So this is an AGP, or ambulatory glucose profile, of somebody with quite a high burden of hyperglycemia, so higher glucose levels. And you can see here, actually, in this case, the time in range is just 51% with no time in hypoglycemia at all. And actually, the variability is quite low. So if I see this sort of thing in clinic, I think, brilliant, this has got real potential to make significant improvements without the worry of high variability and the high risk of hypoglycemia. So you can see here, coefficient of variation 28%. So all we need to do is try and bring down the mean glucose without running into too many problems with hypoglycemia. But some of the things that you think about when you see this, if this is your profile or this is somebody that you see in the clinic. So I think one of the things that strikes me about this is, do we need to think about whether there's a fear of hypoglycemia? So I think this is really prevalent and probably very under discussed. And it may be that when you look at sort of going into the day by day, you can see that people are sort of putting the users putting ease off on really frequently, and it probably doesn't necessarily need to go on, and that increases the workload of the person using it. And doesn't help build trust in sort of the closed loop algorithm to do the work itself. It may be the opposite to what Sarah said earlier, that the personal glucose target has been set to sort of 10 or 11, and that's why the system's sort of running at that higher level. And I find quite often that people sometimes where there is fear of hypoglycemia, and it can often be somebody who's sort of worried about presentations at work or things like that, they tend to maybe have a high glucose threshold at which they would treat as a hypo. So sometimes maybe somebody would say, oh, when it gets to 6, actually, I'm worried that it's going to go much lower than that, so I treat at that point. And I think it's quite an exhausting process, and to constantly feel like you're going hypo at 6, which actually is very acceptable glucose. And so I think it's worth just going through and reviewing the alarms and thinking, do I want to be sort of triggered at 6 the whole time? Is that what's leading me to treat a hypo at that point? And sort of, I think this is a really challenging sort of psychology to manage and try and get round, but I think slowly and steadily sort of getting people's confidence in a closed loop system and bringing things down gradually, knowing that the risk of hypos is low with this sort of system. But I think you can't spend too much time talking about it, because I think it's really, really important to sort of recognize this and then think about how it can be managed. Similar to some of the things that we've had as considerations in the other sections. So thinking about, is actually the carbohydrate ratio a little bit weak? People sort of under delivering insulin for the amount of carbs being consumed. And again, that may fit into a sort of worry about going low later on. Again, thinking about the bolus timing, is this happening a little bit late, combined with sort of a weaker carbohydrate ratio resulting in high glucose? Is it from missed boluses? And closed loop system can mitigate some of this, but sometimes it can't quite sort of keep up with that. And it may be that a low time in auto mode. So if somebody sort of leaves the phone at home or elsewhere, the pump will revert back into standard, and it may be that the pump basal rates have not been updated recently, or in an adolescent someone's grown and they're sort of not been adjusted in keeping with that. So it's just worth checking that somebody's in auto mode the whole time when you see that sort of pattern. As it's sort of alluded to, I think some of the sort of mitigation for this is it's really important to consider the psychological support and a really gradual reduction. I think the idea of bringing a target right down to sort of 5 and saying, right, let's get cracking, is unlikely to work. And I think sort of building confidence and saying, okay, let's bring it down. Let's be aiming for sort of a mean glucose of 9. I still don't think you're going to run into problems with hypos because the variability is so low. So just thinking about some of those sort of strategies for managing these hyperglycemias. One of the things that I think we commonly see, and probably comes in a little bit more with a high variability of glucose, is this sort of big dipper pattern where this person's clearly working incredibly hard with their diabetes management, sort of interacting every few hours, even throughout the night, to be putting on sort of boost and ease off. And it's this kind of a late bolus doing almost too much. So actually they've missed the bolus, they've then put boost on, then bolus, and it's this kind of constant swing. I think it makes somebody feel really terrible in themselves because of these high fluctuations in glucose, and it's exhausting. They're working really, really hard. So I think sometimes in that situation, stepping back, as Sarah said, pop the glucose target up just to try and minimize these hypos and these big swings, and then think about how to sort of adjust things. Similarly, although a lot less dramatic, this person who's got this incredible time in range on this particular day, and actually they're sort of second guessing what closed loop's doing. A lot of these ease off. Closed loop hasn't given anything, so it's just a constant sort of working really hard, but actually, as Sarah mentioned earlier, not really necessarily getting the quality of life benefits of closed loop, allowing the system to manage these things. This boost here, actually closed loop's already ramped up. It's done it. I suspect this has made very little difference. And particularly the things that worry me are overnight sort of interactions with the app. This is the easiest time for closed loop to manage glucose. So I think if this is you, and I think we've all got a tendency to want to sort of do something sometimes, it's just worth bearing in mind, actually, is that sort of essential to do at that time, or can I just trust the system to do its job and as Sarah says, sort of improve quality of life and reduce burden? So hopefully over the past sort of 30 minutes, we've covered an approach to looking at the data and Diasend, and there's so much data there, and I think it can be easy to get a bit sort of lost in it. Thinking about looking at the statistics and how to review that AGP, that ambulatory glucose profile. We've gone through some examples. They might be extreme. You might be able to relate to some of them yourselves, but hopefully given you some tools to think about how to address issues around high glucose variability, which I think is probably the most common thing that people struggle with, and then also some examples of what to do and how to manage high time in hypoglycaemia and high time in hyperglycemia. So I'll hand you back to Candice now.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte and Sarah. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentation. We're going to take questions now. We're just going to leave up the next webinars for you to have a look at and just look at the dates and see if the dates and times suit you. But if we go into the questions, the first question is about what is the purpose of the decreasing ratio setting if it's not used by the algorithm?
It's purely used if you happen to bolus when you're in open loop. So say you had a problem with your sensor, for example, and you were in open loop and you were bolusing an open loop, it would take into account the decreasing ratio from those boluses then. So yeah, that's all it's set for.
And just to clarify, the decreasing ratio equates to the active insulin time. So 25% is 4 hours, 50% is 2 hours, and the sort of 30% is around 3 hours. I think it's the only pump that uses that terminology.
So next question, at what point would you take hypo treatment? So there's a scenario given. So let's say blood glucose levels are 4.2. The algorithm may well have pulled things back. Should you take a small amount of glucose at that point, or should you wait and see what the system's doing and whether it will bring you back up?
I think there's lots of things to take into consideration, isn't it? I think the arrows in the CGM are really probably the thing that I would base my decision on. I think if the arrow was flat or starting to rise, I'd have a bit of confidence that actually things are starting to turn just because closed loop has backed off insulin delivery. So you might be able to get away without taking any. Slightly depends on your patience and willingness to watch your CGM data, which I think is a good 10 minutes to wait for the next couple of dots to come in. And I think exactly as you say, sort of looking at the insulin delivery leading up to that point. So I think it's really tricky, and the decision making of type 1 diabetes is hard enough, let alone bringing in additional things. I know they're there to sort of help. Personally, I think probably the trend arrow of the CGM is the biggest decider. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is absolutely the time where you're going to be turning the phone on its side and looking to see what's been going on. You know, if it's very close to a meal bolus and you're really plummeting, you might be starting to think, oh, I wonder if I got my carbs right there, or I've not absorbed this very well, whatever it might be, and thinking, okay, there's a lot of insulin here that I'm going to still have active. If I just wait to see, you might have to kind of 2 straight down arrows, you're going to end up, you know, you'll end up hypo. So, but you know, if you turn the phone on its side and you think, well, it's 4 hours since I had lunch, the system's backed off for the last hour and a half because it could see I was dropping. And actually, when I look at the rate of kind of fall, I feel like I'm going to flatten out. You might, depending on the direction arrow, kind of wait and watch, like Charlotte said, or at least, you know, not overdo things. So we've talked in some of the other webinars about the use of the arrows for treating hypos, but having kind of a strategy that you stick to in terms of like if you've got an arrow on the slant and you're heading kind of for your low level, thinking actually if I just got in with kind of 4 grams of carbs, a fruit pastel, a jelly baby, a mint or something, just to help it skim, do I need to do that? Or if you've had all that's backed off for ages, but you've kind of got a straight down arrow, you might be thinking actually no, I definitely need to get in with maybe 4 or 8 grams of carbs. So it's as Charlotte says, very dependent on kind of what's just happened in the sort of couple of hours before and what active insulin is around.
Thank you. So there's a question about Boost and how this feature works. Would you go in there and explain?
Yeah, sorry, we've covered some of these things in previous ones, so apologies if this is new. So Boost is one of the functions of this system. So what it does is it makes the algorithm a bit more aggressive, so it gives more insulin. It still targets the same glucose, so 5.8, but what it will do is it will give more insulin to reach that target quicker. The nice thing about Boost over and above what you would most likely sort of liken it to, which would be an increased temporary basal, the nice thing about Boost is that actually once the glucose reaches the target, it won't continue to give more insulin, whereas a temporary basal would until you turned it off. So you can put Boost on for sort of 4 hours, keep an eye on the glucose, but knowing that actually after 5.8, it's going to back off, and it will only then aggressively treat excursions sort of above 5.8. So it's a function that you can select within the app, and you can either say Boost now for however many hours you want to, or you can preset it to come on at a particular time. It's sort of opposite is something called ease off, which basically makes the algorithm a bit less aggressive and increases the target, which people use in sort of for exercise, and similarly can be put on immediately or in advance. So they're sort of like smart temporary basals, really, glucose dependent one.
Thank you. So here's a good scenario about Boost. So if Boost has been on for a half an hour and glucose levels are still rising, say over 15, with no food, the person sometimes gives a small bolus of say 0.2 as well as the Boost just to help it out. Should these be entered as fake carbs or just a bolus, this 0.2 extra sort of correction? What would you recommend?
So as a rule, don't enter fake carbs. There's no need to, because if you want to override and give a manual bolus, then you absolutely can do that. And I think it's something that people often don't realize. So if you go into the bolus menu, the little knife and fork in the middle of the home screen, and you go into the bolus menu, on that initial screen, it will say 0, 0 at the bottom. If you press next on 0, 0, because you're not putting in, it's not giving you anything for the glucose, and you're not putting any carbs in, if you press next on the 0, 0, it takes you to that next screen where you can tap on the 0 that will appear, and it gives you that barrel roll where you can go and put in your 0.2 if that's what you want to do. In the situation, though, that you describe, I would be starting to think, why is the glucose rising above sort of, a high level 15 when, the system's ramped up and it's not really having any impact, and I've put Boost on top? Have I got a set failure? Is there an issue with the site? What's going on there? And that would be my thinking. Do I need to check ketones? So if that's something that's happening regularly, it's probably trying to establish what's the cause of this kind of big rise. We do sometimes see it in younger children when they go to bed and they kind of go into that deep sleep, sort of kind of from like 8 p.m. 9 p.m. their glucose just starts to rise, and I know that can be a time when it can be quite difficult to manage that kind of hormone response. And I know some people have strategies around additional insulin then, and they're quite sure it's not a set failure, it's a pattern that happens every evening without fail, and that can be, sometimes you do need to employ additional boluses, and that's absolutely fine to do it as long as you're sure the insulin's getting in. It's not just a one-off where you're thinking, this is a bit weird, why have I gone so high? Giving extra correction in a set that's not working isn't obviously going to help. So
And you can use the bolus calculator where the sensor glucose comes up in grey. If you tap on that and it will go blue, it will then bring through the correction factor that you've normally set yourself anyway, as if you were in open loop. So you can still use what will be your standard correction factor with normal pump therapy. You just have to tap on that glucose and then it will bring through an insulin correction. But just bear in mind that if closed loop is ramped up behind the scenes as well, that might be too much.
Thank you.
But no phantom carbs, we don't like those.
What do you call them? Ghost carbs.
Yeah, phantom carbs, ghost carbs.
Much harder to work out what's going on.
It is. Muddies the water. So here's another question about personal glucose target. Is it okay to change the target on a daily or regular basis to manage hypos, or should you genuinely use it sort of more sort of short term to raise the glucose, but not on a daily basis? And if you're not changing it all the time, what is the right strategy?
I think you're probably working quite hard if you're changing the, but it would be akin to changing your basal rates every day. And I think that does sometimes happen, and you just find you're chasing your tail a little bit. So what you're often doing is changing them in response to what's already happened. So I think if you're doing it because you're worried about hypos, I would just raise the target probably throughout, get rid of the hypos, and then think about reducing it or adjusting things. I think if it's for something that's happening every day, like activity, I would probably preferentially use ease off. I think it's probably a bit more dynamic than changing the personal glucose target. And it raises it higher and makes the delivery less aggressive. So I think for sort of day-to-day activities, I'd be using ease off, and it is much more accessible on the app as well. It's right in front of you on the home screen to sort of encourage that. I think sort of going into changing the personal glucose target, I would have for sort of more trends over a period of time and small differences in it. So going from 5.8 to 6 probably make very little difference. If you really want to raise a target, I would be going up to 7.5, 8 in the first instance probably, and then see sort of how the dust settles, wait a couple of days, and then sort of re-review at that point.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charlotte. It's similar question. Somebody saying, raising the targets for recurring periods of hypo at a specific time is a really good idea. I guess there's logic that, when the hypos will stop within a day or so of doing that. And then is it correct to sort of gradually bring it down to your original target? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the times that springs to mind is when people go on holiday or something, and particularly if it's a hot country or something's very different, I think it's often a good idea to raise the target for a couple of days if you've got a plane journey and things like that, just to try and minimize hypos. And then actually, as you sort of settle into what's happening in the holiday or what have you, you could then bring it down if that hasn't been a problem, rather than having to sort of stick ease off on the whole time. It's a balance, isn't it? And I think thinking about what's causing the hypos is important. But I think, as Sarah showed in some of those roller coasters, the problem with having lots of hypos is the rebound hypers, and you get into this sort of a real sort of vicious circle about it. So I think trying to cut the hypos is really key for reducing variability.
Thank you. So we've got a few more minutes left and a few more questions. So this is coming from a perspective of somebody who's swapping over from DIY looping, and there's a 4-part question. So I'll ask the first one. If somebody eats while on the low side, would they prefer to reduce or delay the bolus by 5 or 10 minutes? Is there a good way of doing this on CamAPS? So they're about to eat, they're on the low side. Should they delay the bolus, or how else would you manage that?
I think if you are actually in hypo territory, then you need to treat the hypo. But if it's just that you're bobbling along 4, for example, I perhaps just wouldn't go for the 10-15 minutes in advance, just to put the bolus in kind of almost with the first mouthful of food, so it's not going to impact or cause a dip before the rise starts. That's what I would suggest for that.
Yeah, I think trying to avoid treating the hypo with your meal is probably quite important. Treat the hypo first, then do what you normally do for your meal.
Okay. So if part 2 is, if I bolus for a meal that I'll be having in 15 minutes or longer, is there an option of telling the CamAPS exactly what I'm going to eat? So, if I'm running higher but know what I'm going to eat a big meal shortly, I can help prepare the system.
You could put boost on. So yeah, and some people, we've had a couple of situations where we've had a couple of people who have kind of a really stressful morning of having to kind of get up, rush around, get out, and they really have that morning rise, and so they preset boost to come on for kind of 4 in the morning, which when they do start to have that rise, it ramps up faster than the system would ramp up anyway as the glucose rose or preempted, but just kind of gives that additional extra. And some people, again, at certain times of day, particularly in the morning when you get that more resistance from hormone resistance, to have kind of boost on kind of when you first wake up, so that it's more aggressive when you put that breakfast bolus in, can be really useful.
Great, thank you. So is there any way of seeing the total insulin on board, including what the algorithm has given or not in the background?
No, so if you press the little I in the top right, you see the insulin that is currently active from the boluses. And if you look in your stats, you can look in the stats for the day, you can see what insulin's been delivered in the day, but it won't spit out what's active from the system's basal compared to what's gone in from the bolus. The only way you can kind of do that is by sort of totting it up. It doesn't spit it out.
And does ease off or boost learn over time roughly what percentage increase or decrease the person needs during those times to stay in range? Or is it sort of always a fixed increase or decrease?
No, so it does take into account the sort of trends in glucose and how quickly it responds, but it won't, it's not so straightforward as a sort of percentage. One day it goes to 30%, the next 35%. It takes onto a lot of considerations, the individual's insulin sensitivity, their active insulin time, and these things they're not fixed. No, it's very idealistic that we think of these things as sort of fixed numbers. Somebody's active insulin time is always 3 hours, but the algorithm behind is constantly adapting that to the individual user. So no, it doesn't sort of ramp up in fixed amounts, and at the moment it's just on or off.
Thank you. So there's a question about Diasend and putting in CGM manual readings to adjust the graph. This person's turned off those manual readings, but is it still reporting?
Do you mean, so I'm presuming this means sort of calibrations within the system? So you can see those on Diasend. You can select to not see them. Hopefully there aren't too many calibrations, because we wouldn't normally expect sort of calibrations unless there are issues with the sensor. They don't need calibrating or anything. So if it's from a separate glucose meter, that can be paired to Diasend as well. That's not an issue. But I'm not sure why they'd be doing lots of sort of finger stick glucose measurements.
There's a question about new features that may be on the horizon for the CamAPS. Can you share any of those? I know there was a new update that went out this week with a feature or two.
Yeah, so there was, and actually it's something I said to Roman, what would be really nice is to just kind of get a message out to all the users so we can share to let people know that they obviously get an alert that there's an update, but what the update is and what changes that they've been made. So I think he did do that this time. I think there was a change. I can't remember what it was though now.
It was if the bolus is interrupted,
yeah,
how much is given, which is really useful.
Yeah, because it used to just flash up, but once if you then thought, oh gosh, what did it say? You didn't, though it wasn't possible to check. You'd have to go into the pump. But one of the things that's great is when we get suggestions, and we regularly get suggestions, people saying, you know, it'd be great if you could do this. So one of the things was it would be great if you could have the set change alarm on the system. That got added. It would be great if we could see the amount, first of all, if there was an interrupted bolus, and we did that so that reported it, and you didn't have to look on the pump. So anytime there's a suggestion that we can build in, then Roman tries to do it. So we're constantly developing it, making it better. The sort of bigger things is that we're just waiting for Dexcom to finish their final kind of whatever they're doing behind the scenes to mean that we can link to the follow system, which I know a lot of people are waiting for, because then they'll be able to follow and also follow on potentially different devices, so like a smartwatch, for example. So I know that's something that it's been kind of happening all year. It got delayed a bit due to COVID. We were hoping it would be with us before Christmas, but Dexcom have said kind of early next year, so we're hoping kind of before the spring, really.
Okay, so 2 more questions and then we'll call it a day, I think. So one is the compatibility of the CamAPS app and the list of phones that the Dexcom G6 app is compatible with for the smartphones. So are there some CamAPS functions on phones not supported by the G6 app?
It's more about, so the reason it needs to be the compatibility is an issue is purely about the Bluetooth drivers. So quite often if people have got the app on a phone that's not technically compatible, it will still work in a lot of cases, but what will happen is we'll get people contacting us saying they're getting awful problems with connectivity of the sensors and it dropping out all the time, and then when you look and you sort of drill down and say, hang on, have you on a compatible phone? Yes. And then actually when you look and we ask people to submit logs and we can see what the phone, it's not just the phone, but it's also the what do you call it, the like the Android 9, 10, 11, what do you call that, the system it's running, the Android system running on the phone. Yeah, it can be yeah, so so sometimes, like for example, someone said, well, I'm using a Google Pixel 3 and it's not working, and that's one of the ones that's supposed to be compatible, but actually when you looked properly, they were using a Google Pixel 3a, which isn't on the list, but a Google Pixel 3 is. And the difference is that the Google Pixel 3a in this situation is a cheaper phone, and it has the Bluetooth driver isn't as good, and so the connectivity doesn't stay attached so well. And so the reason that we suggest that you use a phone that's on the Dexcom G6 compatibility list is all about the sensor remaining paired to the phone, and that's literally what it's about.
Thank you. And then the last one, which links nicely with our next webinar, is how do I stop the set change alarm sounding like a crying baby?
We're sorry about that. That was caused by a glitch. So the first important thing is always make sure you've got your most up-to-date update. So if there's been an update, update it. But if you've got that, which is left over from a previous version, the way to get rid of it is if you go to your alerts, you check what you've got them all on initially, so you can go and put them back in, and then restore them to I think it says restore to factory alerts or something like that. Reset alerts, yeah. Reset them and then put them back, and it will ditch the crying baby, which I don't know how that even happened.
Terrible one to be coming out, wasn't it?
Awful. Yeah.
Oh, well, but I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much, Sarah and Charlotte, for sharing those pearls of wisdom with us again tonight. I can see from the chat people are saying thank you very much. It's been a really great session, and they've really enjoyed it. So thank you everyone for participating today. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, and we will see you again on the 20th of January for our pregnancy session. So good night and have a lovely, lovely evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.